On this edition of Independent Sources, Scapegoat or Criminal, increasing tension between some of the Chinese and African American community as they clash over the verdict in the case of former NYPD officer Peter Liang. And supermarket sweep, grocery store owners up in arms over a labor mandate that they see as a government overreach. Those stories and more coming up. Welcome to Independent Sources, bringing you news from New York's ethnic and immigrant communities. I'm Garry Pierre-Pierre. A weekend rally in support of the former NYPD officer Peter Liang drew thousands of people in the ire of some in the African American community. Liang was recently convicted of manslaughter in the case of the fatal shooting of Akai Gurley, an unarmed black man in a Brooklyn housing project. Some in the Chinese American community believe that Liang is being scapegoated in an effort to make amends for the lack of indictments in other cases of police misconduct, while members of the African American community see Liang's conviction as justice being served. Zafis LeBrun find out more about this divide between the two groups and the one within the community itself, with reporters from two of the Chinese dailies, April Shu of Tsingtao Daily News and Mona Gao of World Journal.
April and Mona, thank you for being in studio with me today. So we're going to start talk a little bit about what's been happening with the Peter Liang case. Over the weekend, there was a gathering, some estimates putting it at about 50,000 of people coming out in support of the now former NYPD officer. Mona, we'll start with you. What was the sense of what was going on when things happened this past weekend?
Yeah, I covered this rally there. I think there were 50,000 people there. I mean, most of them are Chinese American, some of them even Japanese American. I think what they want to do is just, according to their slogan, they want justice for Peter. They don't satisfy with the verdict which is made in February 11th, and they just want to say their voice, make their voice to the community, to the whole New Yorkers.
And April, for you, I know you've been covering the story. What are they asking for? Because in some cases, I know there are parts of the protesters who say we want Peter Liang to be exonerated completely, and there are others who say differently. So what are they asking for?
According to my observation, I think most leaders in this event, they don't think like Peter Liang is totally not guilty. And they know like Peter Liang made some mistake and he has to be responsible for what he did, but they think the verdict is too heavy for him. I think that's what they asked for. So right now it's a manslaughter charge, and I think what it is carrying a 15-year sentence, correct? Up to 15 years.
Up to 15 years. So what are they saying? Do they want it to be like 5 years and then community service, or are they specific in their demands like that?
I don't think they have a specific number of the jail year that Peter Liang should take, but they're asking people to write letters to the judge to ask him to consider the nature of this accident and what Peter Liang did to protect this city and the details in this accident to have a fair verdict for him.
Now, I know that this movement started a few months ago. Talk a little bit about that, Mona.
Oh, it started maybe 2015, beginning of the 2015.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, 2 months later, after the accident happened.
After the accident happened. Now, this started where did this start from? From what I understand, it started with a drive on on social media, correct?
Yeah.
So how did that start?
I think at the very beginning, people just create a chat group on WeChat, which is social media very popular in Chinese community, and that group can hold 500 people, and then at that time it's only one group, but right now if you ask me, there are at least 20 groups which can hold each of them can hold 500 people
Right.
all over the nation.
Right.
So it starts from the WeChat. But I mean, if you ask me, I think it started very popular since the verdict. I mean, before that, actually Chinese people silenced for almost half year from summer to I think the court start, which is January 2016, and after that, around Chinese New Year Day, because Peter defended himself on the Chinese New Year Day.
Right.
From that point, people start to, more people start to support him, and the WeChat start to, chat every minute, every second.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Now, I know that I know that because of this request for, leniency in some cases for Peter Liang, that there's a bit of stirring between the Chinese American community and the African American community, specifically folks from the Black Lives Matter campaign. Can you talk a little bit about that? What are you seeing on the ground with that?
Yeah, actually on that day of the rally, we saw about around 20 people in Black Lives Matter organization or who support Garry's family. They showed up at the rally, and at first there was some verbal conflict between Chinese community and African communities, and I think people try to calm down after around 20 minutes, and the American community and Chinese community, they just stood at different side of the street, and they just shout their own slogans. But I think it's very difficult for them to communicate each other at that time, because people feel anger and people have their own pursuit. But I have seen some people try to make bridge between these two groups.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And could you talk a little bit more about that effort to kind of?
Yeah, I met one Chinese guy and a Korean guy. They are I think they are the only 2 or 3 Asian people who walk across the street and walk to the Garry's family and their supporters, and they have a very sincere conversation with each other. I remember the Chinese guy whose name is Guo Wen. He tried to understand why Garry's family and supporters are so angry about Chinese people's rally, because Garry's family and their supporters that they think Chinese community is more care about the things that related to their interests, because Chinese people didn't show up when the Brown or Garner stats didn't show up immediately, but they host a rally immediately after Peter Liang's case came up.
Right. So
that's they feel because Chinese people's slogan is justice for all. They don't buy that.
Right.
So Guo Wen also explained to them that actually Chinese, although there were many Chinese people in New York or in America, but we are also minority groups.
Right.
Actually, we have less power than African American groups. That's why we have this rally. We really want justice for all. Ask the cops who killed unarmed people to be responsible for their acts. They want justice for the people of all colors. So Mr. Guo suggests that they want to have a panel in the future to with the Garry's family and their supporters to discuss how these two communities can work together to fight against the unfair system. So that's what I think is a good way to solve the problem, to address the issue.
Now, so Mona, I know that apart from the issue with the African American community's tensions there, that even within the Chinese community itself, there are those on one side of the debate and those on the other side. Are there tensions between those two groups, the pro Liang and those against?
I think, I mean, because I'm also in some of the WeChat groups, so I can saw their conversation. And most of the Chinese protector or who organize the rally, they think we shouldn't bring race issue. It's not Chinese against black or Chinese against African American. It's not at all. It's only just Peter Liang against the system.
Right.
What they are act for is justice system or legal justice for Peter Liang. It's nothing. It's actually nothing with African American at all. Yeah.
Right.
So.
Yeah, but the thing about it is that this whole notion of scapegoating Peter Liang always comes up, and that's some of the kind of the rhetoric that a lot of these groups have been using. Correct? Is that the case?
Right now, they are kind of blame the system, including NYPD. I mean the system, not the officers, not the other 30,000 officers, just the system, because they think they betrayed Peter Liang, and they also think the court. I mean, they don't think they are not saying the jury is not just, it's not justice, but they are saying the way the ADA show the evidence is not just. So that's what they are looking for.
Do you think that this movement is only going to get bigger before any kind of final word on his?
I think so. The organizer already told us they're gonna have a much larger rally. This time, the past weekend is national, and this time they want a worldwide.
Yeah.
I mean, well, actually, last weekend is not only national, because I know some Canada, Chinese community in Canada, they also joined.
Really?
Yeah.
So they had other states involved, and as well as in Canada.
True.
Wow.
So I think they will have a larger one, because April 14th is very important, and still depends on what the sentence is. After that, I'm not sure whether there will be another rally, no matter Chinese community or African American community.
All right. Well, ladies, thank you very much. Mona Gao, April Xu, thank you very much for being in studio today.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
When we come back, a plan to protect grocery workers' jobs, Royals owners who say the government is over-legislating. Before that, Abby Ishola has some other news.
Thanks, Gary. Here's a look at some headlines from New York's ethnic and community media. Mayor Bill de Blasio's rezoning and housing plan is under scrutiny from Latino small business owners who say that the rezoning will displace customers, reduce sales, and intensify their struggle to keep up with rent increases. El Diario La Prensa reports that the mayor's project aims to create 80,000 new affordable housing units, in addition to keeping an existing 120,000. The plan requires new buildings to include a certain number of affordable housing units, and the rents for these units to be adjusted for tenants who make a percentage of the area's median income. Small business owners and advocates believe that a higher proportion of affordable housing is needed in newly constructed buildings, as well as a reduction in the average income eligibility requirements for the apartments. The rezoning effort will begin in East New York, Brooklyn. Also from El Diario La Prensa, the Community Development Project at the Urban Justice Center is assisting some Bronx residents with filing a lawsuit against landlords accused of predatory lending practices, as well as heat, water, rodent, and quality of life violations. According to Sheila Garcia, the Deputy Organizing Director at Community Action for Safe Apartments, developers are buying buildings for much more than they're worth because they think that they will be able to get tenants out and sell for more money. As a result, there is no maintenance, and tenants are charged unsuitable fees. Residents complain that their buildings are not only infested with rats, mice, and other vermin, they're also forced to live without heating and hot water. They say that reports to both the super and landlord go unanswered. In other news, Mayor Bill de Blasio has pledged to deepen the city's relationship with the ethnic and community media. The mayor says his office will spend more than $9 million in language access programs, including translation and interpretation services, in 2016. This after he came under fire for the lack of resources and support the ethnic media receives from the city in comparison to mainstream media outlets. In addition to extra funding for the ethnic media, the mayor said that members of the sector will gain more access to city officials, noting that 3 seats will be reserved for reporters in the City Hall press room. And finally, Voices of New York reports on a new smartphone app that stands to break the language barrier between Central and South American immigrants and the NYPD. The language line is just one of many steps being taken by law enforcement and the City of New York to improve and strengthen trust between them and indigenous communities. Language Line offers interpretations in an array of indigenous languages, such as Mixtec and Zapoteco. When the system does not feature one particular language or variant, it seeks an external interpreter. The NYPD has distributed 35,000 smartphones to officers equipped with the language translation app. Those were just a few headlines from the city's ethnic and community media. Independent sources will be back right after this.
Thanks for staying tuned. Grocery store owners are unhappy about a new bill passed by the City Council because they say it infringes on their rights to hire and fire workers that meet or do not meet their needs. The Grocery Worker Retention Act basically guarantees employees their jobs for 90 days in case a store changes ownership. This bill was created in light of the massive layoffs that occurred after more than a dozen A&P-owned supermarkets were sold when the company went bankrupt in 2015. Zyphus Lebrun spoke with Jessica Garcia, the Deputy Political Director at Retail, Wholesale and Department Store Union, and Jay Pelt, the General Counsel and Vice President of Government Relations for the Food Industry Alliance of New York State.
Jessica and Jay, thank you for being in studio with me today.
You're welcome.
All right. So let's talk a little bit about this bill that was is now a law. Okay. How did it come about? Let's start with you.
Well, my union, the Retail Wholesale Department Store Union, represents grocery store workers. For us, a big concern is that when a grocery store is taken over by another grocer, the usual practice is to lay everyone off and start anew. For us, that means that a lot of our workers become displaced. So this law aims to provide a little bit more job security for grocery store workers by allowing them to remain with the new store owner for 90 days. To allow the new owner to assess their skills, see if there's someone that they can take on and keep on the on the rolls.
Now, Jay, your organization, you're on the other end of this argument. Tell us what the people that you represent are saying about this new bill.
Well, the law singles out our industry and our industry only. It's not clear to us why that should be the case. And the problem with the law is that it provides no flexibility to people who are at risk for hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions of dollars, with regard to the purchase of a grocery store. The initial 90-day period is critical in terms of the success of the store, and all the new owner is trying to do is maximize productivity, which ultimately is better for everybody, the community, employees, shareholders, lenders, suppliers. So it's the rigidity baked into the mandate that's problematic. Also, usually when a store is purchased, it is not the case that everybody is laid off. Typically, as a matter of necessity, some people have to be kept on, sometimes, usually the majority of the incumbent workers, in order to facilitate a smooth transition. And the assessment that Jessica referred to occurs over time.
Right. Now, I know that this law itself was influenced by the A&P bankruptcy and what happened there. Could you guys talk a little bit about how that affected the law coming into being?
It created a greater sense of urgency for the legislation because we knew that a lot of jobs were at risk, and in the end, the bill did not pass in time to affect A&P workers, and about over 1,000 workers are now looking for work, and so it didn't influence the introduction of the legislation. We weren't aware that this was going to happen with A&P, but it did create a greater sense of urgency.
Now, Jay, you spoke of the rigidity of the law. Is there a version of this law that you would be more willing to accept?
Well, it would depend on the terms of an alternative proposal. The problem is that ultimately it's about maximizing, from our perspective, it's about maximizing growth, maximizing economic opportunities, maximizing upward mobility. And the problem is, no matter how well intended, these types of rigid mandates tend to create distortions, and distortions come with costs. So if there are narrow situations, narrowly targeted issues that stakeholders would like to address, our door is always open. We're more than happy to talk to anybody.
Right. Do you feel like the people that are necessarily you're trying to target with this bill are the ones that will be, protected from being laid off and so forth?
We think so. This bill targets larger grocery stores, not the mom and pop owned small supermarkets. So we're looking at the big box supermarket owners who are taking over large supermarkets and protecting the workers in these supermarkets. They're protecting not the supervisors and managers, but rather the hourly wage workers who have been there at least a year and who work at least 8 hours a week.
But if I may, the law does cover stores 10,000 square feet of selling area and above. So that does cover a significant number of food retailers that are not big box: Key Foods, C-Towns, Bravos, Associateds, Met Foods. They're not big businesses, they're small businesses. And these are the very types of businesses that need the flexibility in terms of selecting workers in order to maximize productivity and survive and hopefully ultimately thrive and add jobs in a very competitive business. Our business gets more competitive by the day. 30 years ago, there were no discounters. You didn't have drugstores and dollar stores selling large amounts of grocery items. Now you do.
Right.
Well, I will add that the research does show that grocery store employees, or at least in the food industry, if you've been working there for a while, the fact that you have the experience and you have the know-how do lead to greater productivity. It creates savings for the store owner if they don't have to retrain their staff. So keeping on trained staff, people who know the health and safety standards of the city and do have the relationship already also with the customers, that goes a long way to also bringing customers in through those stores, right? They're coming back for the familiar.
Right, but there are those types of workers who are not incumbent workers, and some of those people might be unemployed. So it's zero sum. There's no net gain. For every worker that's protected, another worker gets frozen out. So the ultimate question is, who gets to make that decision as to which workers are best for these stores? It is clearly not the case that every incumbent worker is better, for example, at food safety compliance than every other worker who might have more experience, better experience, who's either unemployed and looking for a job or employed someplace else but looking to trade up in terms of a better opportunity. So it's a matter of which mechanism should be making these decisions. Should it be government or should it be the market?
Right.
And the legislation allows for the store owner to still make that decision. It just provides 90 days of job security for the workers. They learn about the takeover, the store is taken over, they have 90 days to plan to look for alternative work, and the employer has an opportunity to assess whether they're a good fit for their company.
Right, but here's the rub. There's a private right of action built into the bill, the right to commence a private lawsuit, which we requested to be taken out. It was left in. The best way, the only way to avoid a lawsuit is to keep the workers, the incumbent workers, in the store beyond the 90-day period, right? Then there can be no wrongful termination. And that's the rub. That's why it was referred to as 90-day trial period during the committee public hearing. The private right of action makes that not necessarily true.
And to clarify that point, if an employer violates the 90-day retention period, fires someone without cause within those 90 days, the worker has options. They can go to the city, file a complaint with the Office of Labor Standards, which will hopefully be established soon. In the meantime, through the Department of Consumer Affairs, they will investigate. If that investigation takes too long or the worker decides that they would rather take it to court, then they have that opportunity to go to court. It is only for being fired before those 90 days. It is not, because they were let go after the 90 days.
Right. It's a little more involved than that, because there are provisions built into the bill that a worker can sue for an alleged violation of any provision in the bill. So, for example, the bill requires that written performance evaluations be performed be completed with regard to every worker. Why? If it's just if it's intended as a temporary 90-day employment, it creates grounds to sue. if an employer chooses to make an offer for ongoing employment, that offer has to be codified in a writing.
Right.
Why? We don't see the need for that other than to create potential grounds for a lawsuit. The other big issue is there's a huge conflict here with state law. New York, under state law, is an at-will state in terms of employment law, right. Which means that workers can, absent an agreement to the contrary, an individual agreement, a collective bargaining agreement, a worker can be fired for any reason, subject to anti-discrimination laws. This directly conflicts with that state law, so it's problematic. So what's going to happen when a worker alleges that they were let go without cause? The first question is, did the employer really need cause? And then the employer submits a file with 10 pages in it of cause, in their view, but a government agency or a judge disagrees. Is that fair to the employer on multiple levels? And the way it gets complicated, without getting into too much detail, it's sort of a two-step process. If a worker alleges a violation, first there's the government piece and then there's the private piece. Right. The problem is the worker can opt out of a proposed settlement between the government and the employer, or if the complaint filed with now Department of Consumer Affairs is not resolved within 120 days, the worker can then sue. The problem is the government has no requirement to inform the parties as to the status of the complaint as of the 120th day. So hypothetically, the government could investigate, the employer could incur defense costs, the government can decide that there's no grounds, there's no evidence of a violation, and then the worker can sue anyway.
Okay. Did you want to add something to that?
You know, I think that when the legislation was not written, I don't think, to go after businesses and to shut them down and create a cumbersome process. It was created to protect workers and to give them relief if the law is violated. The fact of the matter is we have a lot of faith in DCA and being able to resolve issues if they've come up. Hopefully they won't be coming up. Hopefully it'll work out. But if they do come up, we do have faith in DCA, and we do feel it's important to also give workers the freedom to take their own action if that is the way it is what they choose. At the end of the day, you're right. Both parties need to provide evidence, and the courts would need to decide. But it's important for worker protections to have something like this in place.
Right, and hopefully at the end of the day, it becomes a situation where nobody feels that they're being taken to the cleaners by their employer or by their employees. Jessica and Jay, thank you so very much for being in studio today. It was a really great conversation. I didn't even have to say much. Thanks again for joining us.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica.
Thanks.
We'll be right back. That's our show this week. Thanks for staying tuned. Till next time, be independent-minded.